The first thing I remember is the sound, not the music of the party or the laughter of our friends, but the sharp, ugly, choking sound that cut through it all like a blade. Then came the frantic shouting, the piercing wail of a distant siren, and the cold, creeping dread that settled over me as I watched my brother-in-law collapse. My sister-in-law's meticulously planned attempt to poison me at our own housewarming party had backfired in the most spectacular and horrific way imaginable, an act of malice that would ultimately land her in a jail cell and leave her marriage in ashes. For 8 years, I have been married to my husband, Leo, and for 8 years, my life with him has been a sanctuary, a place of love and partnership, with one dark, persistent shadow. His sister, Sophie, a woman who seemed to carry a storm cloud of toxicity with her wherever she went. You have to understand, it wasn't always this way. Or at least, I didn't see it for what it was. When I first met Sophie at a casual barbecue in her parents' backyard, I was immediately taken with her. She was effervescent, funny, and seemed so genuinely thrilled that her brother had found someone. She hung on my every word, laughed at my jokes, and pulled me aside to tell me a hilarious and slightly embarrassing story about Leo as a child. I felt welcomed. I felt accepted. Looking back now, I see the performance. I see the data gathering, the sizing up. The charm was a mask. And it didn't take long for it to slip, revealing the true face beneath. A person so profoundly manipulative, so possessive of her brother, and so relentlessly bitter that it was a poison in itself. Realizing the kind of person I was dealing with, I spent years walking on eggshells, forcing smiles and navigating her moods, all in a desperate attempt to maintain a fragile peace. The roots of her obsession with controlling Leo's life run deep, twisting back into his teenage years. When he was 17, Sophie orchestrated a relationship between him and her best friend at the time, a girl named Chloe. She was relentless, arranging coincidental hangouts, talking Chloe up constantly, and making Leo feel as though he'd be a monster not to give it a try. He did, for a few months, but ended it because he felt suffocated, astutely recognizing that he was dating his sister's agenda, not a person he had a real connection with. Sophie was furious, accusing him of humiliating her friend. A few years later, when Leo was in his early 20s and single again, she tried a different tactic. She presented another candidate from her inner circle, insisting they were a perfect match. When he politely declined, she didn't just get angry. She staged a full-blown meltdown for their parents, complete with dramatic sobs and accusations. Her tearful monologue was about how she, his sister, deserved to have a say, how she needed him to be with someone she felt personally comfortable with. Thankfully, my in-laws, David and Eleanor, have always had a good head on their shoulders and saw her theatrics for what they were. They offered her a tissue and told her Leo's love life was his own. This was the history I walked into. During the beautiful, sunlit months when Leo and I were first dating, his parents were nothing but warm and encouraging. They saw their son was happy, and that was all that mattered. But Sophie's reception was a polar vortex. Her tactics were insidious. We'd be at a family dinner, and she would, with a feigned innocence, steer the conversation toward one of Leo's ex-girlfriends. "Oh, did you hear?" she'd say, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Jessica just got a huge promotion at that law firm. She's a partner now. I saw her post about it. She looks incredible." Then she would turn to Leo. "You two were always so good together, such a power couple." The air would grow thick with awkwardness. I would try to focus on my meal, my cheeks burning, while Leo would patiently say, "Sophie, that's in the past. We're happy for her. Let's move on." This would only provoke her. She'd sigh dramatically and pivot her attack to me. "Oh, Clara, don't be so sensitive. It's just history, unless you're the jealous type." Her sabotage became bolder. My in-laws are wonderful people who love hosting family meals, but I began to dread the invitations because Sophie turned them into ambushes. She would call my mother-in-law an hour before dinner. "You'll never guess who I just bumped into at the market. Leo's old flame, Amy." She looked lonely, so I insisted she join us for dinner. "I knew you wouldn't mind." And so I would have to endure an evening making small talk with a woman who was being paraded before me as a ghost of Leo's past. Sophie would lurk on my public social media profiles, a ghost of a different kind. She never followed me, but she was always the first person to view my stories. If a male colleague from work left a comment like, "Great presentation today," on one of my posts, she would screenshot it and send it to Leo with a message. "Just so you're aware of the kind of suggestive content your girlfriend is posting online." In the beginning, Leo and I would just laugh it off in private, marveling at the sheer audacity and pettiness of it all. It was our secret joke. But her words began to carry a sharper edge. When Leo and I announced we were moving in together, she cornered him. She didn't just express disapproval, she launched a full-scale character assassination, listing what she called my multitude of failings as a woman and a partner. She told him I was messy, that I wasn't ambitious enough, that I didn't have the right social pedigree for their family. She ended her speech by promising that she could find him someone infinitely better within a week. That one cut deep. I had only ever been kind and respectful to her, and her venom felt entirely unprovoked. Naturally, our engagement sent her over the edge. We gathered our immediate families at his parents' house to share the news. As Leo showed everyone the ring on my finger, the room erupted in applause and happy tears. But my eyes found Sophie. She was sitting perfectly still, her face a blank mask, a terrifying void in a room full of joy. The silence from her corner of the room was louder than all the cheers. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, she pushed her chair back violently, the scraping sound echoing in the sudden quiet, and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. The celebration died in that moment. Later that evening, she unleashed a torrent of hysterical, sobbing phone calls to Leo, screaming that he had disrespected her. She claimed that as his sister, his one true confidant, she deserved to be the first to know, in private, before anyone else. Her sense of entitlement was breathtaking. She followed this performance with a series of chillingly formal, almost threatening text messages directly to me. One read, "I trust you understand the gravity of the responsibility you are undertaking. He is a sensitive man who requires a specific kind of care. I have been the primary woman in his life until now, and I will be watching to ensure you do not fail him." I was so unnerved I couldn't even formulate a reply. I just left her on read, an act of silent defiance I knew would be like throwing gasoline on her fire. From then on, Sophie's war went cold. She ignored me completely in person, looking through me as if I were a pane of glass. Yet, in a bizarre paradox, she dove headfirst into our wedding planning. She insisted on being there when I shopped for my dress, standing in the corner of the boutique with her arms crossed, offering backhanded compliments like, "That one is surprisingly flattering on your figure." She came to my bridal shower and spent the entire time on her phone, sighing loudly whenever someone mentioned my name. Both Leo and his mother called her out on it repeatedly, but her negativity was like a leaky faucet, a constant, irritating drip of criticism on everything from the floral arrangements to the font on the invitations. The final straw, the moment the dam of my patience finally broke, happened one rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was at my in-laws' house, joyfully discussing our choice of classical music for the ceremony with Eleanor. Sophie, who had been pretending to read a magazine, let out a loud, derisive scoff. "Are you actually serious?" she sneered, looking at me with undisguised contempt. "That music is so dreadfully common. It has no class." This is exactly what I meant when I said my brother was marrying down. A red haze descended over my vision. All the years of slights, of insults, of forced smiles and bitten tongues, boiled over. I stood up, my hands trembling, and I heard a voice, sharp and cold and unfamiliar, come out of my own mouth. "That's it," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You're done. You are uninvited from our wedding. I cannot and will not stand one more second of your constant, vicious criticism." Sophie looked as though I had physically struck her. Her mouth fell open, a caricature of shock. It was clear the thought of me, quiet, peacekeeping Clara, ever fighting back, had never once crossed her mind. My mother-in-law, without a moment's hesitation, put her hand on my arm and said, "Clara is right, Sophie. This has gone on long enough. Being opposed by both of us sent Sophie into a fury. The fallout was predictable. A hysterical phone call to Leo, wails of how I had humiliated her in front of his mother, and a demand that he get his future wife under control. But this time, Leo didn't just placate her. He was furious. He told her, in no uncertain terms, that he stood by my decision 100%, and that she would not be welcome in the same room as us on our wedding day unless she offered me a sincere, heartfelt apology. A few hours later, a grudging text message appeared on my phone. I apologize for my words. I knew it was coerced. I knew it was meaningless. I read it, and once again, left it unanswered. I was emotionally exhausted from planning a wedding. I had no capacity left for her high school drama. Ultimately, she did come to the wedding. I relented. Not for her, but for me. I didn't want the story of our wedding day to be about her absence. I didn't want to give her the martyrdom she so clearly craved. Our theme was soft pastels, dusty rose, and sage green. Our guests looked beautiful. Sophie arrived dressed in a floor-length, brilliant white gown that was more ornate than my own wedding dress. The gasp from the guests was audible. She looked like a vengeful bride, there to reclaim her groom. We were utterly speechless. Throughout the entire reception, she glided between groups of guests, not celebrating but mourning, telling anyone who would listen about the profound grief she felt losing her brother to an outsider. Leo, seeing my distress, confronted her near the gift table. Her defense was astonishing. She claimed it was her right to wear whatever she wanted and accused me of being a domineering bridezilla for even noticing. When her theatrics continued, my father-in-law, a man of few but firm words, finally walked over to her, quietly told her she had made her point and that it was now time for her to leave. The sight of her being escorted out of our wedding reception was a fresh, new layer of humiliation I wouldn't soon forget. After that day, I erected a wall. When our son, Liam, was born a year later, that wall became a fortress. I made it crystal clear. Sophie was not to be anywhere near my child. She protested, of course, but Leo and his parents supported me completely. They had seen enough. They understood I was protecting my son not just from a person, but from her poison. About 2 years ago, a genuine tragedy struck. Sophie and her then-boyfriend, Mark, suffered a late-term miscarriage. It was a shattering loss, and it was impossible not to feel for her. The entire family grieved. Seeing her raw human pain, Leo and I felt our own hearts break for her. We decided, perhaps naively, to let our guard down. We thought surely an experience this profound must have changed her. We began to slowly let her back into our lives, allowing her to visit our home, to get to know her nephew. And for a while, it seemed to work. To my genuine surprise, she was wonderful with Liam. She played with him, read him stories, and seemed to adore him. A small, hopeful part of me began to think she had finally turned a corner. But a personality like Sophie's doesn't get rewritten. It just gets repressed. The old habits crept back in, slowly at first, then all at once. Her conversations became inescapable monologues of victimhood. Every story was about how life had wronged her, how a former friend had betrayed her, how a new boss was out to get her. In the universe, according to Sophie, she was a flawless protagonist in a world of villains. She was an expert at playing the victim card to manipulate sympathy, utterly incapable of acknowledging her own part in any conflict. Then, earlier this year, she announced her own engagement to Mark and, in a breathtakingly petty move, invited the entire family except for us. When a baffled Leo called to ask why, Sophie explained with chilling calmness that she couldn't risk me being at her wedding because she was afraid I would cause a scene. I was flabbergasted. I, who had spent years absorbing her abuse in silence, was now the designated scene maker. I called her myself, demanding an explanation. She told me, without a trace of irony, that since she had deliberately worn a white dress to my wedding, she was now consumed with paranoia that I would retaliate by doing the same to her. The manipulative, circular logic was designed to make me the aggressor. I was furious. After Leo and I discussed it with his parents, Leo delivered the final blow. Not only would we not be attending, but his parents would not be making their planned financial contribution to the wedding. This, of course, sent Sophie into a spiral of tears and blame, all directed at me. Even her own fiancé, Mark, told her she had lost her mind and had no right to blame me after openly admitting her own malicious past actions. Sophie's only defense was that my wedding was ages ago, and I should just be over it by now. A few days later, a syrupy, tearful apology call came. Her parents were holding firm, and she needed the money. Sophie, I have learned, can be incredibly charming and persuasive when she wants something. Exhausted by the endless drama and just wanting to move on, I accepted. We all went to her wedding. It was a beautiful day, and for a few hours we were a normal, happy family. It didn't last. Less than 6 months after her perfect wedding, Sophie was on our doorstep, bags in hand, complaining that her marriage was already a disaster. We let her stay, and for days our home was filled with her endless venting about Mark. The core issue seemed to be that they were struggling to conceive, and in Sophie's mind, the fault was entirely and exclusively his. She refused to even consider that there could be other factors at play. When she wasn't decrying her husband's failings, she developed a strange, new fixation on my daily routines. I work from home and frequently have confidential client calls, so I work out of our home office with the door closed. Sophie found this deeply suspicious. She would hover outside the door, asking questions the moment I emerged. Who were you talking to for so long? Why do you always need so much privacy? I explained that my work required client confidentiality, but she would just give me this strange, knowing smirk, as if she was in on a secret I was trying to hide. The situation finally imploded during what was supposed to be a peaceful family lunch at our house. My mother-in-law was idly chatting about a friend of hers who was going through a messy divorce after discovering her husband's infidelity. Out of nowhere, Sophie cut her off mid-sentence, turned to Leo, and asked in a loud, clear voice, "Speaking of which, Leo, did you and Clara ever sign a prenuptial agreement?" The clinking of cutlery stopped. A profound silence fell over the table. She looked directly at Leo, her eyes wide and expectant, as if I wasn't even sitting right next to him. Leo, who is not a man to mince words, replied flatly, "No, Sophie. We both earn a good living. We trust each other. We never saw the need." Sophie let out a derisive snort. "A lot of people trust each other until they don't," she said, her voice dripping with insinuation. "You have to be careful. Cheaters and gold diggers are everywhere these days." The implication was so thick I could choke on it. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "What exactly are you trying to imply, Sophie?" And then she unleashed it all. She turned to Leo, her voice now filled with fake concern. "Leo, I have to say something. I'm your sister. It's my duty to warn you." The constant secret phone calls in her office, her obsession with her appearance. It's obvious she's meeting someone. Before she could continue her poisonous fantasy, my father-in-law interjected sternly. "Sophie, that is enough. Stop meddling in things that are not your business." But she was unstoppable. She barreled on, tears welling in her eyes for dramatic effect. "I'm just trying to look out for my brother," she cried. Then she turned to me, her face contorted into a mask of sweet, venomous concern. She gestured towards our son, Liam, who was happily playing in the living room. "And honestly," she said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, "are we even sure that Liam is really Leo's? I mean, if you really look at him, he doesn't have the family resemblance, does he? I have never in my entire life seen a look like the one that crossed my husband's face. It was a terrifying transformation from calm to pure, unadulterated rage. He rose slowly from his chair, his eyes locked on his sister. "You," he said, his voice a low, trembling growl, "are not a mother. And you do not deserve to be one. Your child that you lost is better off in paradise than it ever would have been being raised by a venomous, hateful creature like you." Sophie's jaw literally dropped. My in-laws sat frozen in shock. Leo wasn't finished. "You are a shameless, pathetic person," he continued, his voice rising with every word. "Your only purpose in life is to try and ruin the happiness of others because your own life is empty and miserable. You do nothing all day while your husband works himself to the bone to provide for you. You need to look at your own failing marriage and your own miserable life, instead of projecting your sickness onto my wife and questioning the paternity of my son." reduced to a sobbing, incoherent wreck. Sophie looked desperately to her husband, Mark, who was sitting right next to her. But Mark's face was a mask of stone. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared at his plate. Utterly defeated, Sophie fled the table and ran to the bathroom, her wails echoing through the house. My husband was shaking with an anger so profound it scared me. I reached across the table and took his hand as his mother came to his side, murmuring calming words, telling him she understood, that Sophie had finally gone too far. He looked at me, his eyes full of anguish, and apologized for the vile things his sister had said about our son. In that moment, all I felt was a profound sense of relief that the monster was finally out in the open, that he had finally stood up to her in a way that could never be taken back. After he composed himself, he walked over to Mark and apologized for the scene, but he completely and utterly ignored his sister for the rest of the day. From that moment on, we cut all contact. For 1 full year, our lives were blissfully, wonderfully peaceful. 2 months ago, we discovered I was pregnant again. It was a joyous, unexpected gift, and we were over the moon. We decided we would announce it at a big housewarming party my in-laws were generously throwing for us in their beautiful, sprawling backyard. The guest list was carefully curated, just our closest friends and beloved family. The atmosphere was perfect, string lights twinkling in the trees, soft music playing, the air filled with laughter and the smell of barbecue. And then, I saw her. Standing by the garden gate as if she belonged there, was Sophie. My heart plummeted. Leo and I froze, staring at her. She had apparently heard about the party through the family grapevine and had decided to show up, uninvited. She rushed towards Leo, her arms outstretched for a hug, gushing about how much she had missed him, how deeply sorry she was for their last conversation. Leo didn't hug her back. He stood firm, my hand in his, and said, "The person you need to apologize to is Clara." Sophie's smile faltered for a second, but she recovered quickly. She turned to me, her eyes glistening with what I knew were manufactured tears, and recited a flawless, seemingly heartfelt apology. She told me she had been in intensive therapy for the past few months and had come to see how her jealousy and insecurity had made her treat me so horribly. I didn't believe a single syllable. But this was our party, a celebration of our home and our future. I didn't want a scene, so I nodded politely and accepted her apology, a bitter taste in my mouth. My in-laws, ever protective, quietly came to us and said they hadn't known she was coming and would ask her to leave if we felt uncomfortable. But Leo, wanting to preserve the happy mood, just shook his head. We decided to let it go. For a while, things were surprisingly normal. Sophie mingled, she laughed, she socialized. Her cheerfulness felt brittle and over the top, completely out of character, but I told myself to give her the benefit of the doubt she claimed to have earned. When it was time for speeches, Leo stood up and spoke so beautifully about our life together, about our home, about me. He made me feel like the only woman in the world, and I flushed with the same giddy delight I felt when we first started dating. Then, with our arms around each other and beaming smiles on our faces, we made our announcement. "We have some fantastic news to share," Leo said, his voice booming with happiness. "We're having another baby." For a split second, there was silence, and then the yard erupted. Our friends and family screamed with delight. My mother rushed to hug me, tears of joy streaming down her face. My father-in-law clapped Leo on the back so hard he nearly fell over. In the midst of this beautiful, chaotic celebration, my eyes once again found Sophie. The mask had dropped. The forced smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure, stunned shock. Her expression curdled into something that looked like irritation, like fury. She turned her back on us. A familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. Was she going to ruin this for us too? But before I could dwell on it, I was swept up in a sea of hugs and well wishes. Later, I was sitting at a table, watching the party swirl around me. Sophie approached, that bright, false smile plastered back on her face. "Clara," she chirped, her voice unnaturally high. "You must be starving. I am just so thrilled about the baby. Please, let me get a plate for you." "You shouldn't even have to get up." She bustled off towards the buffet table, and returned a moment later, handing me a plate with a flourish. "I really want to make up for all the terrible ways I've treated you," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "This is a new beginning for us." On the plate, Nestled next to a scoop of potato salad was a large, tempting-looking sauté skewer, glistening with a thick, creamy peanut sauce. My blood ran cold. I have a severe, life-threatening allergy to peanuts. Anaphylactic shock. Everyone in Leo's family, especially Sophie, knows this. We've had conversations about it for years. I stared at the skewer, then up, at her smiling face. The intent was so clear, so horrifyingly obvious. I felt dizzy. Disappointed, but on some level, not even surprised. I set the plate on the table beside me and stood up to get my own food, my mind reeling. Just then, Mark, Sophie's husband, walked over, a friendly smile on his face. "Clara, Leo, congratulations. We're so happy for you." After a moment of cheerful conversation, he glanced at the untouched plate on the table. "Hey, you're not eating? What's wrong?" "Oh," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sophie accidentally brought me something with peanuts." "Oh, that's no problem at all," he said, his eyes lighting up. "I absolutely love satay. Don't let it go to waste." "I'll take this one. You go on and get yourself a fresh plate." And before I could process what was happening, before I could scream, "No, don't," he had picked up the skewer, slid the meat off with his teeth, and swallowed it. Not 5 minutes later, the choking sound ripped through the air. Mark was on his feet, his face a mask of confusion and terror, clawing at his throat. Everyone froze. He staggered forward, pointing at his throat, his face rapidly turning a terrifying shade of purple. We all realized in a collective wave of horror that this wasn't just choking. Something was terribly, horribly wrong with the food he had just eaten. And then, his eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed onto the grass. Chaos erupted. Someone screamed. Someone else was shouting for an ambulance. Sophie rushed to Mark's side, her face a performance of wifely terror. Her eyes fell on the discarded plate on the ground, then shot up to meet mine, her expression twisting into one of pure accusation. "Did you give my husband your plate?" She screamed at me, her voice filled with a venomous rage that everyone mistook for panic. All I could do was nod, numb, and paralyzed with shock. Later, sitting in the cold, sterile waiting room of the hospital, a doctor would tell us that Mark had been poisoned. The words hung in the air, unreal and monstrous. And the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The plate was meant for me. That poison was meant for me and my unborn child. I'm writing this in the dead of night, my hands still shaking so badly I can barely type. Sleep is impossible. A relentless loop plays in my mind. Mark collapsing, Sophie's screaming face, the wail of the ambulance. And underneath it all is a crushing, suffocating wave of guilt. I should have been faster. I should have screamed. I should have knocked the plate out of his hands. I should have thrown it in the trash. My husband, Leo, has been a rock, holding me, telling me it's not my fault, that it was a freak accident. But he doesn't know the truth. He doesn't know it wasn't an accident. He thinks I'm just traumatized by the event itself, not by the knowledge of his sister's intent. I have to tell them. I can't carry this alone. My in-laws have a comprehensive security camera system all over their property, including several cameras that cover the entire backyard. I know with a sickening certainty that the footage will show everything. It will show Sophie walking to the buffet. It will show her handing me that specific plate. It is the proof I need. The next evening, I sat down with Leo and his parents in their quiet living room. The weight of what I was about to say felt like a physical pressure on my chest. With my voice trembling, I recounted the events of the party, not as a chaotic accident, but as a calculated act. I told them about my peanut allergy, a fact they knew all too well. I told them how Sophie had insisted on getting me a plate, how she had presented it to me with words of reconciliation, and how that plate had contained the one thing that could have killed me. As I spoke, I watched their faces transform. Shock, then disbelief, then a shared, dawning horror. Leo's expression hardened from confusion to a cold, contained fury I had only seen once before. My mother-in-law, a woman who is always pragmatic, was the first to speak. "The cameras," she whispered. "We have to look at the security cameras." The four of us huddled around my father-in-law's computer as he pulled up the footage. And there it was. The truth, in stark, undeniable high definition. We watched Sophie hand me the plate. We watched Mark take it. We watched him collapse. The video evidence was irrefutable. It left no space for doubt or denial. As the reality of what we were seeing sank in, the room filled with a heavy, pained silence. Leo, now fully comprehending the depths of his sister's malevolence, battled to control his rage. His parents were simply devastated, horrified at the lengths their own daughter had gone to inflict harm. There was no debate, no hesitation. We all knew this was no longer a family drama. This was a criminal act. They made the decision to turn all of the footage over to the police. The next step, we knew, would be up to Mark. It's been a month. The moment the police reviewed the security footage and heard my statement, Sophie was arrested. Faced with incontrovertible evidence, she didn't even try to deny it. She confessed everything immediately. When Leo visited a recovering Mark in the hospital to explain the whole ugly story, Mark was as stunned and horrified as we were. Leo told him that whatever he decided, he would always be family to us, but that he owed it to himself to seek justice. Mark didn't hesitate. He not only agreed to press full charges, but he also filed for divorce. From her jail cell, Sophie made one last desperate attempt at manipulation. She called her parents, weeping, and delivered her final bombshell. She too was pregnant. She pleaded with them, begging them to bail her out, to make this all go away, for the sake of their future grandchild. It was a sickening, transparent ploy. But this time, the spell was broken. Her father, his voice heavy with sorrow and resolution, told her that it was long past time she faced the consequences of her own actions, and that they were, finally, done coddling her. The police investigation revealed she had laced the peanut sauce with a fast-acting, non-lethal but potent toxin, designed to cause severe gastrointestinal distress and hospitalization. She has been charged with multiple felonies, including aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, and food tampering. And through it all, in her statements and calls, she maintains her narrative. That somehow, this is all my fault. Sophie is in prison. She was found guilty on all charges. I never attended the court hearings. My in-laws would occasionally give me updates. The trial revealed the pathetic, petty motive behind it all. A lifetime of consuming jealousy. She had planned to announce her own pregnancy at our housewarming party and felt that our happy news had stolen her spotlight, her one chance to be the center of attention. In a fit of what her lawyer tried to excuse as a rage fueled by pregnancy hormones, she decided to poison me. She had the audacity to claim in court that she only wanted me to end up in the hospital for a few days. She never intended, she claimed, to cause serious, permanent harm. The judge was not moved by her pleas for a reduced sentence. She will be far from our lives for a very long time. Mark is finally free. His divorce was finalized shortly after the trial. We have made a point to include him in our family events, to make sure he knows he is not alone. During a long, quiet conversation a few months ago, I apologized to him profusely for the 100th time for handing him that plate. He stopped me, looked me in the eye, and told me with absolute conviction that none of what happened was my fault. Hearing those words from him finally began to untangle the knot of guilt I had carried for so long. I am so happy to say that he is doing well and is slowly rebuilding his life. As for Leo and me, our family is whole again, and it has grown. We welcomed a beautiful, healthy baby daughter just last month. Her presence in our home is a constant source of warmth and light, a powerful force pushing back against the shadows of the past year. Our son, Liam, is the most doting and loving big brother imaginable. Seeing our two children together, seeing the pure, uncomplicated love between them, makes us appreciate the peace we have fought so hard to find. My parents and my incredible in-laws have been our steadfast rock, guiding us with love and support through this new chapter of our lives. The storm has passed, the air is clear, and our life is finally, blessedly, quiet. Thank you for listening to our story. It's a reminder that sometimes the most shocking events happen right within our own families. If you want to hear more incredible, real-life accounts, please make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can stay connected with us.